Hello, welcome to this week's England Rugby Tuesday training webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm David Fraser from the England Rugby Game Development Team. The Game Development Team look after the training of coaches, match officials, medics and volunteers. And these Tuesday training webinars will run throughout this rugby lockdown period. We'll be focusing on a range of coaching and refereeing topics. And tonight's topic is refereeing the tackle. Delivering this webinar is Michael Patz, the England Rugby Match Official Development Manager. And joining Michael are Premiership referees Tom Foley and Craig Maxwell-Keys. During the webinar, there'll be opportunities for you to participate by sending in questions through the Q&A feature. And we'll also be asking you questions during the webinar to get your input. So look out for some polls appearing on your screen. We'll aim to answer as many questions as possible, either by replying to you through the Q&A or by putting your questions directly to Michael, Craig and Tom. And the webinar should last between 45 and 60 minutes. And at the end, we'll let you know how you can listen back on demand and how we want you to help keep the conversation going. So with that, I'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you, David. So good evening, everyone. Really pleased and excited to be here. To try out this new technology and our way of staying connected with you guys and girls who are clearly doing the same as we are and staying at home. Welcome to Tom and Craig. Thank you for allowing us to come and visit your homes on this Tuesday evening. How are you guys going?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Patsy.
Okay, Craig?
Yeah, all good. Cheers, Patsy. Training continues, unfortunately. But yeah, apart from that, all good.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear. Before we crack into the meat of this evening's topic, I just think it'd be really great if we can just cover off the principles of refereeing so that we've got a clear concept of those. These are the things that the areas that we ask newly qualified referees to consider when they're doing their training and take through to their officiating. So they're around that mnemonic of SEL, so around safety, enjoyment and equity, learning and laws. And I just wondered from a professional referee's point of view, from you guys, just how do those resonate with you and how do you apply them during your games?
Well, I think from my perspective, look, enjoyment's a massive one. I think that's the thing that's common across all the levels, whether it's grassroots or the pro game. You want to enjoy what you're doing. Otherwise, I would question why you are doing it. The other one there, obviously safety, particularly community game, whether it's kids or amateur adults. We want them going to work or school on Monday morning. So it has to be a safe game. And the learning, the one there, is what really excites me, Patsy. I think people talk about enjoying like refereeing or especially elite level sport because they thrive under pressure. For me, it's all about the learning. Whatever the game is, whatever the level of game it is you're refereeing, it's exciting to see whether your skill set meets the challenges that game throws at you. And there's always learnings. You could deal with a situation well, there's still things you could do better. So it's the learning that jumps out there for me.
Okay, awesome. Tom, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think what Craig said is absolutely right, and I think what's really important to note here is that those 4 or 5 things transcend all levels of the game. Really, it doesn't matter whether you're doing a level 12, 13, 13 game, or whether you're doing a Premiership game. Those things are equally as important in every single level, and I think Craig's spot on in what he said in terms of there's always an opportunity to learn. Every time you referee, if you take something from it, then you'll improve and you'll develop and of course the enjoyment of it. We wouldn't do it otherwise, would we? And I think that's why it's got to be at the core of everything we do.
Absolutely, and just taking that on, it's that enjoyment across the game, so enjoyment for the players as well as ourselves. Clearly, just thinking about the laws perspective, do you get sort of a different slant the higher up you sort of officiate around the accuracy of application of those laws, or how would you see those?
Okay.
So, cheers, Tommy. So in our world, accuracy is key. So, I mean, we have our own internal assessments from a professional department, of which learning is a key part, but also we have to be accountable for the decisions we give. So that's where the laws and the accuracy comes in. And we're also independently assessed on those accuracy. But the laws, there's very grey areas in law, isn't there? And it's that balance between, especially in the elite game, where we're ultimately in the entertainment business.
Yeah,
it's a product. We want to keep people involved. We want to draw new players and spectators in. And there's a balance between if you're applying the laws to allow there to be a fair and safe contest, but also that balance against making it an entertaining spectacle. We don't want to go out there and referee the law to the dotted I and cross T, because BT's face counter would never get above 2. You'd have 50 penalties a game. That doesn't entertain anyone. Go back to that slide. No one's enjoying that. So there's a balance. We're always striving to get better at striking that balance.
Okay. Yeah. Anything to add, Tom?
Yeah, look, rugby's great because it is great. It's one of the difficulties if you're a referee, but it's also one of the great things about the game. And as Craig said, there are times. I think one of the first things I was told when I first started refereeing is you can't start ignoring the laws until you know them. And I think that's a really good thing that I always remember, is that you can't make those judgment decisions until you know what you're basing them on. So I think that's something which has always stuck with me. Okay,
brilliant, thank you. I appreciate that you guys are seriously young compared to me, but you would have still in your career seen thousands of tackles. And I guess the next thing to look at from our point of view is actually what is a tackle, and talk through that from your perspectives. The slide up there sort of talks to it around the ball carrier is held by one or more opponents, being brought to ground, and then also what the tackler must do in so much as they could continue to hold the ball carrier until the ball carrier is on the ground. So thinking about all the different tackles that you would have seen, and I say there've probably been thousands of them, what does that actually look like to you as you're sort of refereeing it? What are you thinking about? So, Tom, if we come to you first.
Good choice, I think. So again, going back to the law. So, for the tackle to occur, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the ball carrier to be held and brought to ground. So we need that player to be held, and we need obviously the player to go to ground. And then, obviously, that sounds really straightforward, but that has implications on wider things then, such as offside lines later on through that game process. So if you haven't got a tackle, you can't have an offside line at the tackle. So these are things which we really need to be really, really clear on. So being brought to ground, well, what does that mean? Is it the knee dabbing the floor, or is it? I think there was a question that came in earlier on actually, which asked about incomplete tackles. Well, we want to see knees to floor. We want the tackled player to be held when he's brought to ground. If he's not, or he or she is not, then the tackle isn't complete, and we haven't had a tackle. So there are so many things that we need to be sure of before we can start refereeing it as a tackle and then taking it onto a ruck later on. And those three things there are obviously the core of it.
Okay, Craig, if I come to you, just pick up on the previous question we had and what Tom was saying there about the need for the ball carrier to be held. Sometimes you hear the referees calling not held. That's clearly a split-second judgment call. What are you looking for if you were going to say not held in a tackle situation?
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it, because that tackle has obviously got to complete the tackle, as Tom says, so he's got to hold him for that tackle to be there, but equally he wants to release as soon as he can to get back to his feet so they can go back in and contest. So there's always a balance in terms of making sure the tackle's complete, but then being able to get back in the game. So it's when those players stand up, having not released the ball, and then start running down the field, is where we're going to start saying not held, because otherwise everyone expects you to be refereeing it as a tackle. I know no situation's the same, but I think as a default for us, we want it to be clearly held, so clearly a tackle. Otherwise, we're going to play on, because we want that continuity in the game. And if a player is able to continue running into space, that's what we want to be able to encourage.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I mean, I think we're starting to get it here now, and talking about a certain process that you get into when you're starting to look at a tackle. And the different elements to a tackle. So if we start thinking about that, the process, I think when we were chatting yesterday, Craig, you were talking about being the third person there. So what are you sort of talking about when you're saying that?
Yeah, I think it links to the point at the bottom, which is get there early to help you process what's happening. So the tackles can be a really complicated area of the game. There's so many people can be involved. There's so many different moving parts, so many potential infringements with so many different people trying to achieve different things. So I think for me that the starting point, and I was always taught it from when I took up the whistle, was get there to be the third person there. So you've got the tackler, the person with the ball, and then you want to be the next person there, because that then allows you to see the whole phase develop in front of you, which means instead of potentially refereeing the symptom, you refereeing the cause of the problem. The last thing you want to get is the second or third offence. So I think it can be a really complicated phase of play. Get there first, you see the whole thing develop in front of you. That for me simplifies the picture. And look, it starts off really simple. Before we get into any of the complexities of the tackle has got to move out of the way. So in terms of a process, I suppose the process is only unlocked from my mental perspective if that tackle is out of the way. Until that tackle is out of the way, all bets are off, and you've got nothing else to worry about, really.
You make it sound nice and simple there, Craig. So, and I guess that's part of it, isn't it? Sorry, Tom.
So yeah, I think from what Craig has said is absolutely correct. I think the tackle is really dynamic. A lot can happen in a very short space of time, and I think one of the things which I think is a benefit whilst refereeing it is that you actually start refereeing the tackle before the tackle even takes place. So using your game understanding, feeling how the game is going. Is it a dominant tackle? Then that's going to you can start refereeing it slightly differently than you would if it's a ball player dominant tackle. So if you have got a dominant tackle, then we're going to perhaps see you might concentrate more on attacking side entry because they're having to come back and back. It's going to be more difficult for the arriving players to get through the gate. You want to make sure that the tackler releases, or the assistant tackler has shown a clear release before they go back on the ball. So I think a lot of what we can do to help ourselves is to gauge what the situation is before it actually happens, and then that will dictate what situations are likely to arise. Are more likely to arise in that particular situation, and we can start refereeing it slightly differently, perhaps.
Okay, so you talk there around the tackler and the tackle assist. Clearly, the potential for two people making that tackle. Do you differentiate between them? And if you do differentiate between them, how do you do that?
So your tackler will go to ground as part of the tackle. Mm-hmm. And then for that, as Craig said, the first thing we're looking for is for that tackler to get out of there as quick as we can, as quick as they can. If that doesn't happen, then as Craig said, that's the key to unlocking the tackle process, and that's the first step that's the first hoop that we've got to jump through. The tackle assist will not go to ground. So that's in these two player choke tackles, for instance. That would be the player who stays on their feet. And typically tackles higher around the ball to stop that offload, and we're waiting for that. But we still need them to release as well before anything else can happen. So if the tackle is completed and they haven't let go of the ball carrier, then we can still penalise them for not release.
Okay.
Yeah, I think picking up on that point as well, we talk about a clear release, and I think a lot of referees will get to that breakdown and be umming and ahhing about, well, has he released or not? I think the emphasis is on the word clear. So if real speed, at one view, you're not convinced there's been a release, then it can't be clear. So I'd penalise that. So that's a very simple rule we apply. If we're in doubt about that release, then there can't have been a clear release. So provided the tackler's moved, that would be your next offence that you can go after.
And I think that's something that everyone can relate to around that clear and obvious. So have you seen it clearly, as you just described in there? So I think that makes it a whole lot easier then, doesn't it?
Yeah, anything that makes this phase easier, I'm all for.
So we've talked about the tackler, the obligation on them, and the tackle assist. So if we're comfortable that they've done what they're obliged to do, i.e. they've released the tackled player, they've got out the way, what are we looking for the ball carrier to do then?
So, from my perspective, what that ball carrier needs to do, that ball needs to be available. We want rugby to be played, so the ball needs to be back in play as quickly as possible. So, so that ball carrier has to do something. And again, going back to what Tom mentioned around the context of a tackle, if we've just had a line break and we can see that ball carrier's got no support around them, and there's an assist tackler who's on his feet who has released and who's looking to contest the ball, it's highly likely that ball carrier in that context is going to try and shield the ball, slow up, presenting that ball to give his teammates chance to arrive. So in that scenario, you'd be more aware of potentially people going to the squeeze ball position to deny the assist tackle the chance to get on that ball. So again, context can help you in terms of judging the ball carrier's actions as much as the tackler and tackle assist actions.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So again, I guess, Tom, coming back to you there, where Craig is describing there is being aware of having that game understanding of what's occurred and what's likely to occur.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you've got a line break, it's likely that the ball carrier is going to get isolated. So you might be, your priorities might change slightly then, so that you're looking that the ball carrier releases, but you'd also be looking that the assist tackler releases before they get on the ball, because they might have more time than they would in a static situation to get on that ball before the arriving players get to the breakdown. So I think there's a question there that's come in actually about tackler assist going for the ball, provided they've released the ball carrier completely and it's been clear, as Craig said. Of course, they can go back on in that ball, and that's where we get the jackal. That's where we get the continuity. We get turnovers, and it makes for a more exciting game.
Yeah, and I think when we talked, when the laws sort of changed, we talked about seeing the players sort of clap their hands and seeing that clear release was one of the methodologies that we sort of talked about from a coaching perspective, certainly. Has that changed at all, or is that the sort of when you talk about the clear release, that's what you're looking for?
I think that was one of the things which was coached. I think it was great from a refereeing point of view, because it takes away any grey as to whether there's been a release or not. It's not something I've seen for a while now, but if players want to bring that back in, then happy days. I'm all for that.
And again, it removes that lottery of decision from their perspective. If they're not making it clear and obvious to us as officials, then they're running a lottery of whether or not they're going to get penalised, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, and Patsy, just picking up on the ball carrier, and there's a question coming about something we're starting to see at the top end of the game, which will probably creep down, which is when the ball carrier tries to buy a penalty by pushing the ball into a player on the floor and then pretending that obviously he's denying the chance for that ball to be recycled. I think we want people to be positive in their actions, and whether it's the ball carrier, the tackler, the arriving players. So if that ball carrier is deliberately pushing that ball into a tackler, for example, when there's other options available to him, as in he can just play the ball for his 9 who stood there to pass it, then obviously we don't want to reward that, and we want to discourage that. And there's many ways through just having a conversation in downtime where we can do that.
I think there's sorry, Patrick, just very quick. I think what in those situations, of course, as Craig said, we want to discourage that, trying to buy a penalty. I think, however, we still need to work on that principle of, if the tackler's on that wrong side, he is still liable to be penalised, and we can't be going soft on that tackler because somebody is trying to potentially buy a penalty. Of course, we deal with the gamesmanship, but from our tackle philosophy, we need to make sure that tackler's out of the way. Okay.
So we've covered points 1, we've covered points 2. If we think about the arriving players, then we started to talk about the sort of the line breaks, and thinking about the arriving players from a tackler's perspective. What are you looking for them to do, Tom?
I think the sort of the catch-all term would be to be positive. So, I mean, there's obviously a lot of chat about people going off their feet at breakdowns, and I think what we're looking for is an arriving player shouldn't have to go off their feet to clear somebody. But we know that inevitably they will end up off their feet as part of the contest. So what we're looking at, are they coming in off their feet to try and ensure that they retain possession, to stop the defence from contesting, to stop that contest at the breakdown? If they are, then they're the ones we need to be penalising. If they're going off their feet as a result of a positive contest over the ball, then I think that's slightly different. And I think so that there needs to be some sort of differentiation between those two. So we're looking for them to be on their feet and looking to be positive. And then obviously we've got to be aware of where they're coming from. So I touched upon it earlier on in terms of arriving players, especially attacking side entry. Are they coming through the gate? Are we clear on where the gate is? So they're the two things which I think we're really focusing on once we get past the ball carrier and the tackler.
Okay. Anything else to add to that, Craig? Or you...
No, I'd agree. I think there's a link between the tackler being encouraged to move out of the way and these arriving players. It probably links to the World Rugby sort of clarification, which I dare say we'll touch on in a bit. But if the tackler have completely cleared that tackle zone, then there's no reason for those arriving players to go off their feet to have to clear them out of the way because they've already cleared the tackle zone. So I think there's a link there between clearing those players on the floor from the initial tackle zone out of the way before those arriving players then get there. And just, I work off a lot of visual cues. So for me, if we've got a player whose body trajectory, so if you basically track his shoulders, if his shoulders just are constantly high to low, like the trajectory of a landing plane, there's nothing positive in that. It's completely illegal. And I think it came out of New Zealand to start with. The trajectory you want to see for a positive clear out will ultimately form the shape of a tick. So the player will arrive, he'll dip down to get underneath the shoulders of the player he's clearing out and then drive him up and away from the ball. So it will form, if you imagine a sparkler, draw it in the air, you'll get a tick shape.
Yeah.
It works for me. Whether it works for anyone else, probably not, but worth a try to sell the concept.
No, I can see the concept. Certainly the planes landing element and the planes taking off was the one that I sort of have always tried to use, trying to be quite simple around it. As you say, if they're arriving, if they're trying to take off, which is your tick, Craig, or if they're coming into land and just basically shoulders down, then there are two different pitches you're getting, aren't they? So yeah, okay. I think we have. I think there's a question on the next slide which talks about the new World Rugby guidelines. So Andy Lord has come in there and asks about the guidelines and how these will affect the role of the jackler and arriving players staying on their feet. So I think we've started to discuss that a wee bit around those landing planes or those planes taking off, if we use those analogies. Yeah,
I think you're completely right. I think firstly, touching on these World Rugby guidelines, look, we as a group haven't actually sat down and discussed how these are going to be implemented yet. So we've seen them the same time as everyone else saw them in terms of that press release. Yeah. So we still need to have a discussion around the ins and outs of how this is going to be applied. But yeah, you're right. There's going to be a renewed emphasis on clearing that tackler out of the way and freeing up that ball and that tackle space. The knock-on effect of that, we hope, is there's no need for those arriving players then to go off their feet. So yeah, we've already touched on that. I think the other points that we're probably going to have a discussion around is to do with side entry. And where we all know what a side entry is when the player's working from touchline to touchline as opposed to goal line to goal line. But at what point does a side entry just become a really good clear out? Is it 60 degrees? Is it 50 degrees? Those are the conversations that we still need to have to drill down to the actual detail. And I dare say it will probably change the balance we strike between refereeing the attacking versus the defensive team. I think at the moment, we give a lot of leniency to the attacking team because we want that continuity of rugby. Whereas if you look at how these sort of refocusing on law has been written and the clips involved, there's a definite refocusing on ensuring the attack are just as legal as the defence, which may, to be fair, encourage more turnovers. And if you've got a turnover, you definitely don't have a set defence, which is just as entertaining if we can strike that balance.
Yeah. Tom, any other sort of thoughts around Andy's question there?
No, I think, as Craig said, it's still very high level. The detail of it hasn't actually been ironed out yet, and I'm sure that when it is, it'll be communicated. I think the crux of it is that we're looking for positive actions, not negative actions, whatever that might be, whether that's in the clear out in terms of off feet, or whether it's angle of entry into the tackle zone. I think what's really important, though, is that we really want to maintain this contest because, as Craig says, that's where you get your turnovers. That's where you get the excitement. We want it to be. We don't want it to be a sterile situation where you can guarantee that the ball, the team in possession are always going to get the ball back, and we just end up with very, very organised defences and teams going from side to side. But there's a balance to be struck because we want continuity as well, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this works out in the next few months, to see how we strike that balance, hopefully for the better.
Good. Okay. David, just from your point of view, you've obviously been monitoring the chat. Is there any additional questions that be coming through the chat that we can pick up at this point?
Yeah, a couple of consistent ones or consistent themes. How do you guys feel about, at the level you're refereeing, do you have to try and make it an attractive contest versus accurate application of the law?
Look, this, as I said, I guess going back to my last comment, really, I think it's all about getting the balance, isn't it, between applying the laws about making sure that we have a contest where the defence is able to compete for the ball, and also ensuring that we get some continuity. You know, if we go penalising everything, then we're going to end up with 50 or 60 penalties in a game. It'll be really stop-start. The ball in play will be 20 minutes, and everybody would be pretty annoyed by it all. So I think that it applies to any level. You know, you've got to have some sort of empathy. You've got to decide which things matter and which things don't, because otherwise, going back to the cell analogy earlier on, where there's no enjoyment if somebody's getting penalised 30 times in a game. And there's referees you don't want to be giving penalties like that all the time. So it's all about judging it and trying to get the things which really matter, the clear and the obvious, and not necessarily trying to get everything.
And just one for you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that referees should be slightly more forgiving when thinking about issues like ball release or speed of tackler release at the lower ends of the community game?
Again, it comes down to that contextual judgment, David, of the skill and the fitness of the players. We talk about immediate release. Immediate is at the top end would be different because those players are conditioned physically, and they are coached a whole lot more than the players who turn up at the games I referee on a Saturday. To be fair, the guys, if they roll out as quickly as they can, then a lot of the time that's really pleasing. And I think it's having that understanding, that empathy for the players and their abilities that you've got in front of them. So it's based on, for me, it's the context of the game that you have there.
Thanks.
Okay. I think we've got a couple of questions coming in on the chat, and they relate to in a similar way to this one here around from Michael there of recently passing his refereeing award, and tips around slowing down in his own mind around the action, and how do you create that time and space?
I think that probably links to a point made on the previous slide for me, Patsy, around positioning. If you can get there as that third arriving player, so to speak, then you've got the best chance of seeing that picture develop in front of you. And as I said, if you start on the principle that until the tackle is complied with law, nothing else is going to really come into the equation, then it starts off really simple. I think the other one for me, in terms of trying to slow down the action of a tackle in your mind, for me what works is having that clear mental image of what you do want to see at a tackle versus what you don't want to see. So what does the ideal tackle look like, and what does a completely illegal tackle look like? If you've got confidence and clarity in that image, I think you're in a lot better place when you see it in front of you, because you understand what it is you want to see, what you don't want to see, and you understand why the perfect tackle looks how it is versus why the illegal tackle looks how it does. How do you get that? For me, it was a case of watching a load of YouTube clips. There's a load of rugby online. Watch breakdowns. There's loads of different levels of rugby on YouTube as well you can watch, so you can get the applicability to whatever level you're refereeing at, and yet watch those breakdowns and just interrogate what is it about them that's good, what is it that's bad, and then I think it just puts you in a position of confidence when you actually take to the field. And then as far as possible, it will slow what is a very fast event down in your own mind when it comes to refereeing it.
Okay. Anything else, Tom, from your point of view?
No, exactly that. That's those snapshots in the back of your mind that you can relate back to, and you see that flash image when you see it on the pitch. It's just getting that memory bank and pictures in your mind, I think, is absolutely critical. And again, as I said earlier, using the game context and the situation to try and start refereeing it before it even happens, I think, is something which can really help, because it'll change what your priorities are and what you're looking for and what's likely to happen, and so on. In one case, it might not happen, but it might help you out a little bit. Yeah,
and I think coming back to Craig's point around using YouTube or using Facebook or wherever you can watch rugby, because there are so many platforms out there now that you can watch various levels of the game, is watch those different games, see how the referee is refereeing it, and also seeing what the players are doing, and then you'll get a far better idea when you have that I was going to say distant view, that detached view, I guess, of the game, because when you're in the moment, sometimes you may not pick up on those cues.
100%. I think if you're using YouTube as a medium, it's really easy to share that footage with other referees within your society or within your club, or players and coaches through WhatsApp, or just over an email, or over a chat in the bar with your smartphone, and then it just starts a conversation, and that's how everyone learns.
Yeah, I think the other thing in that question, Patsy, which is quite interesting, is about positioning, and I think the key thing here is about making sure that as a referee, Craig talked about being the third person there, but getting there early, but also getting to a position where you can see what you need to, and that'll vary from tackle to tackle in game situation as well. I think there's an up-and-coming referee on the chat called Andrew Small who's asked about this positioning play a part in how you referee the tackle. Of course it does, and the fact is you can't referee the tackle accurately unless you get there nice and early. You're really clear on where the gate is. You're really clear that we're going through the process of the tackle, that we've had the clear release, and you can't see that unless you're in a position, in I say the correct position. But I don't think there is a correct position. It'll vary from tackle to tackle, and as a referee, you've got to use your game understanding to try and judge where the best place is. But you've got to be there early. Okay.
And I think some of the questions that were coming up in the chat box there sort of relate to the ones we've got on the screen here, which is around that distance. That's coming back to your point, Tom, of getting in there, and I guess getting out if you need to, so that you can see the additional bits once you're comfortable with what you've seen at the tackle, and you've communicated that verbally if you need to as well. So you've reinforced that preventative sort of chat. I don't suppose we've really covered that overly at the moment, but how much do you sort of do you feel you need to talk at tackle situation, whether at whatever level you're sort of refereeing?
I think this is all. It's all context in terms of the level that you're refereeing. If you're doing age grade or lower, third team level 12 rugby, then obviously you're going to, in order to try and get continuity and in order for people to learn and enjoy it, then you're going to try and talk a lot more than you might see Craig or I talking in a Premiership game. So I think in terms of the level of communication, it'll be there's a time we tend to talk when it helps us as a referee. It's obviously all about helping the players, but there are times when we need to help ourselves as well and make sure that we don't have to make a big decision or a difficult decision. And if we can talk somebody off in order to prevent having to give a penalty, provided that it's fair and right to do so, then we should be. But I think what's interesting in that question as well is that talk about offside lines. Well, we've got to be sure, especially when we're refereeing on our own, the no touch judges, and we're on a community pitch with 3 or 4 people stood there with their dogs. We can't leave that tackle zone until that contest is over, until we're sure that contest is over. We shouldn't be worrying about anything else. We need to referee that tackle first and foremost. And once we're happy that ball is available and there's no threat to further contest, then we can move on to things like the offside line and your positioning and the distance that you're away from the breakdown that you stand might change in that instance as well.
Okay. Anything else from you, Craig? Right now.
No, I agree with Tom. I think obviously if the breakdown is still a contest, we don't want to go reffing off sidelines. I mean, I know from time to time commentators on the TV games make a big deal about space, but there's no use seeing an outside centre stood offside if you've got the 9 being taken out of the back of a breakdown. So it's remembering that process and how everything sort of fits in the order. And yeah, I think, look, at the lower levels, it's that balance, isn't it, between we've got a massive opportunity to coach versus referee at that phase to help the players learn and to add the continuity, which will probably influence what we say, how much we say, and also how close we get to that breakdown. But equally, if we do find ourselves refereeing 7s in the summer, or we may find ourselves back refereeing Premiership games over the summer months, who knows? I wouldn't want to go into every breakdown with it being blisteringly hot. So there's those breakdowns where you can see that the defence aren't going to contest. The ball carrier has presented himself in a long shape downfield, placed the ball. You immediately know that's going to be quick ball straight off from the 9. There's no point going close into that breakdown because there's no contest on. Whereas if you've got a load of pick and goes and it's a muddy, wet, rainy day, you're probably going to have to be a lot closer into that breakdown because there's more that you're going to have to manage.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Just Dave, just coming across to you again before we go to the next slide. Is there anything else coming through on the chat that you want us to pick up on?
Yeah, there are a couple about the speed of decision making around things like the time it takes the tackle player to roll away, or how long do you leave it before calling the ball unplayable. Are they, Craig, thinking back to your point earlier about looking at clips on YouTube and things, are they the types of things you're looking at on YouTube to see the different scenarios that those events happen in and try and work those out for yourself?
Yeah, I think the speed is definitely one thing you'd look at, and I would try and build a clear picture in terms of, when I'm looking at clips online. I think in terms of the unplayables, I think the key thing you want to look for is the ball coming back, versus what we don't want is a player from distance come running in to hit that breakdown because it's really slow. So there's a balance between, we want that continuity so we can manage the ball back into play, great, but we don't want a player to arrive from distance and potentially go off his feet and cause an injury. So if in doubt, you need to make a decision there relatively quickly to prevent that potential scenario. But in terms of speed as well, I think, again, going back to context, if you can see the 9 is there trying to pass the ball and you've got a player illegally preventing it becoming available, your speed of decision making there is going to be quicker than if there's no 9 there or no player there to pass the ball. So even if that ball was available, but for someone being illegal, there's no one there to play it. So in those instances, you've probably got an extra split half second to manage that player off to free the ball up. So I think context is still relevant with speed. I think the previous question talked about peripheral vision. I think that's where you need an awareness as to, is the 9 in place or is someone in place to play the ball or not? And in terms of speed linked to communication, I think a rule I was taught really early on is whatever you want to say at the breakdown, whether it's release, roll away, hands out, say it to yourself first in your head, and then if it's still applicable, say it out loud. Because there's probably a lot of our communication which we say and it's redundant and adds no value. So to try and make everything we say add value, say it to yourself, and if it still needs to be said, then repeat it out loud. But it's amazing, by not saying something, that problem can fix itself, because depending what level you're at, the players are better at solving those problems before we need to get involved.
Okay. Brilliant. There's a few questions coming in already about sort of moving from a tackle to a ruck, and that sort of change of phase, if you like. So from your point of view, Tom, because Craig's done a lot of talking there, from your point of view, what changes for you in the way that you're refereeing that?
Well, once we've got that ruck, we touched upon earlier about the assistant tackler, the tackler assist, being able to get in over the ball and compete for the ball. Once we've had that ruck, then obviously there's that opportunity for the defence to try and jackal the ball has gone. So we've got to be really clear then about when that ruck forms, whether the defender was on the ball previously, and if they weren't, then nobody can put their hands in there. If they were, then they're entitled to continue to compete for that ball. We need to be clear about what constitutes a ruck. Obviously, a player from each side on their feet over the ball, and technically bound onto each other as well. But we'll pass on that for a second. But I think, so you need to be really clear when we get a ruck. We see a lot of people just shout ruck because they're I won't say scared of the contest, but they're unsure about whether the contest can continue or not, or whether the contest is legal or not. I think that they're the situations we see quite a lot, and I think that comes back to earlier on being if you arrive at a breakdown when it's still a tackle, you've got a chance of being able to see these things. If you're arriving at a breakdown when it's already become a ruck, you've got no chance of being able to referee it accurately and appropriately. So I think, again, that speed of getting to the breakdown, going through the process, once we've got that ruck, knowing what people can and can't do.
Yeah. Okay. And Craig, just coming to you there, do you think the players look at you to do anything different if it's turning into a ruck from a tackle, or are they still looking for the same from you guys?
I think each player is different. Some players like more guidance, more sort of input from us from a communication perspective than others. Some of viewers, they will do what they want to do, and if it's illegal, penalise them. Others are more prepared to work with you and want that input. I think it goes back to, as Tom said earlier, what helps us as a referee most at that given situation. And I think whatever the level is, as you step up from one level to the next, I'd say the ruck is probably one area that will challenge the referee the most, because as you go up the levels, it gets quicker, it gets faster, and as Tom's alluded to, people become a bit more uncomfortable with things when they're happening faster because they're less certain, less confident in them, so they just shout ruck and hands off to sterilise that phase of play, which then normally just means loads of set defence, the attack retain possession, we go side to side. So I think it's, on that point, I'd just say, embrace it. The ruck, as you go up level to level, will get faster, it will get more challenging, but the only way to learn is to put yourself back out there week in, week out, and become accustomed to it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. And I think, taking the question from Lewis here around, going back to Tom's point around the first player there, if the first player gets a good tug on the ball, but the ball carrier doesn't release, do we immediately penalise, or what are we looking for when we talk about the player getting a good tug on the ball? I think, Craig, we were talking earlier, either today or yesterday, around that the right to win it.
Yeah, so if you're going to give someone a hold-on penalty or allow them a turnover, they have to earn the right, and simply getting a hand on the ball for a split second doesn't mean they've won the right for that holding on penalty. So you want to see them clearly on the ball, obviously on their feet, clearly on the ball. So if their hands have gone past the ball, obviously they're beyond the ball, all their weight's forward, they're going to be off their feet. However, if they put their hands down to the side of the ball and then scoop up onto the ball, for us that's fine, that's positive. We're gonna play on in that scenario. But then they can't be on the body either. There's a few instances where they can't get on the ball, but they'll try and get on the body and create the impression they're trying to win that penalty. So clearly on the ball, and yeah, they've got to survive that initial clear out. Now, the World Rugby sort of reclarification around this phase may change how we referee this area of the game a bit, but as things stand currently, we want them on the ball, and then normally they'd have to survive a clear out. Because if that player comes in and rucks them immediately off the ball, it frees the ball up into the nine's hands, we can pass it and we can get that continuity of play. If the clear out fails to shift him, then we've got good positive play. The attack have failed to get there in time to clear him off, so then he's earned the right for that penalty. Okay. Anything to add there, Tom? You happy? Tom closes his eyes and hopes for the best.
He's not the only one.
Absolutely. We want a contest. Somebody just getting their hands on the ball, for me, doesn't constitute a contest. We want to see a competition for the ball. We want to reward really good play, and we want continuity. But continuity can come from turnovers as well. So if that jackler has got over the ball, done really well, got into a really strong position, and it survives that clear out, then they deserve the reward. If they don't, then perhaps they don't. Okay,
brilliant. And I think the question here from Alistair just sort of takes it to a little bit different from a tackle perspective, around the pick and go, around the try line, etc. And how does a defender perform a legal tackle? I think we were sort of talking through this yesterday around that pick and go. The idea of the player is always starting in a low position with the ball near the ground. So how can that tackler make a legal tackle?
Look, we've got to use some rugby sense and context in these situations where you've got people picking and going. They're getting towards the try line. They're looking to try and score. It's the ball carrier who is taking themselves to ground. Quite often in these situations, we don't even have a tackle because it's the ball player voluntarily putting themselves on the ground in the first place. So it would be pretty unfair then to go after a defender for tackling somebody who's already only 6 inches off the ground. If they're doing something illegal, so they're not looking to wrap, or they've got their arm tucked, and that's how they're looking to stop the ball carrier, then that's completely different. But if we've got a situation where a ball carrier is voluntarily going to ground, we've got to use our rugby sense here, and provided everything is safe, and legal, then we don't need to be looking for problems in terms of penalising the tackler in that situation.
And I think your point there, Tom, around the fact that it's got to be safe and it's got to be legal. So not having the arm tucked to the shoulder, leaning with the shoulder, etc., is really key at those points. Any other thoughts there, Craig? Anything that you would sort of recommend?
No, I think Tom has summed that phase of play really well. Yeah, has to be a degree of common sense used, particularly in those pick and go scenarios. And yeah, as you've alluded to, Patsy, one of the most common illegal trends there for people to stop those pick and goes is those sort of no arm tackles where they just chop away at people's legs. I think that's the real focus that we don't want to see there from a defender.
Okay. And we got a question in here from Tim, who talks about in the pro game how do so many players in the ruck end up lying on players, clearly not supporting their own body weight. I think we sort of talked about that a little bit, but I think Tim's question's in two elements here. It's firstly taking that game that you guys would officiate primarily on TV compared to the age grade rugby, where we're trying to differentiate there, and it's the skill and the physique of the players who you're officiating compared to an age grade player, where we're trying to create good technique and practice in those age grade players, perhaps. So just your thoughts on that, Craig, because I know we've sort of chatted a wee bit around that.
Oh, look, yeah. I mean, they're very different games, aren't they? So it's the same law book technically, but for two very different sports. Even comparing sort of amateur adult rugby, let alone kid rugby, to the professional game, they're worlds apart in terms of the skill of the player, the size of the player, the nutrition, the coaching they get. They're completely different. So to try and compare them, I think, is probably not a fair comparison to make. And look, unfortunately, if you look at the games in the country, there's probably 1% of the games played are professional, and that's what's on TV. The other 99% of the grassroots rugby, which doesn't get that exposure. So I don't think there's anything we can do in terms of kids seeing what happens in elite rugby and then trying to replicate that. I think what we do have the opportunity to do, particularly the grassroots, is communicate with players. There's nothing stopping us at either live during play or maybe at an injury or a substitution moment, going up to the players and just having a chat with them in terms of their actions at a breakdown. If they did go off their feet but were able to play through, we can highlight to them why that was illegal and why they should next time try and stay on their feet. And this does link to what we talked about earlier. If we do clear the tackler out of the way, we do clear out the tackle zone, then hopefully the knock-on effect of that should be less players needing to go off their feet in the first place. And it also links to the question we talked about, like, what do we want to see from a positive clear out? If someone clears someone out positively, the end result will be both those players potentially off their feet and on the floor. So it's not always illegal to be off your feet, provided the initial intent was positive. People are naturally then going to end up on the floor, provided they're clear of the ball. That isn't an issue.
Yeah, and that brings that materiality side into it, doesn't it? As you say, if they're clear of the ball and not affecting the play, then why would you be penalising them if they are off the floor anyway? Yeah. Okay, David, just coming back to you there. Just is there anything further in the chat log?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a follow-up on that previous question about the tackles around the try line. Someone asking about why tacklers get away with latching on close to the line, meaning a defender cannot get a clear shot at the tackle.
Latching on the ball carrier?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So what's our thoughts around, I guess you're talking about the ball carrier being at the front and then a player latching on the back of them, or two players latching on the back of them, which clearly makes it an unfair contest for the one defender coming in to try and stop them, yeah? Is that the question, Dave?
Yeah, that's how I'm reading it, Michael, yes.
Okay. What's our thoughts on that, Tom?
Good choice, Tommy.
I've got the next one for Craig. Don't worry, mate.
Look, it's something we see a lot of, isn't it? And I agree. It's a situation where the defender is going to be on the back foot from the very start. I think, if they do if they do manage to take that tackle, then as a referee, you've got to be really clear on that latch and making sure that they get back to their feet and they're not killing the contest by lying on top of the ball carrier, preventing a jackler from getting on top of the ball, preventing that contest that we talked about earlier on. Now, of course, I think somebody alluded to it as a flying wedge. I don't think it constitutes a flying wedge necessarily. The ball carrier is obviously they're always at the front, and it's normally just one man, one player bound onto that ball carrier. So provided it's not, that latcher isn't preventing a potential tackle and therefore obstructing, then I think there's not necessarily a huge amount wrong with these. But then if they do prevent that contest, or they do prevent the tackle being made, then obviously it's something that we need to be sanctioning.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. As I picked on you for that one, Tom, I'm going to let Craig have a read of this one. And you saw this one earlier, so yeah.
Yeah, but it's very Laurie. Can tackles turn into moles? Can moles turn into tackles? So going back to the definition of a tackle from earlier, you can't turn a tackle into a maul, in the sense that if we've already had a tackle, then the ball carrier will be on the floor. And obviously then we can't have a maul, because for us to have a maul, we need the ball carrier on his feet, and then with one additional player from each side in contact with him on their feet. But I think more what that refers to is at junior rugby, I think we see a lot of ball carriers go into upright tackles, and then loads of other players run in. So we have a lot of players on their feet around that ball carrier, which then that scenario may then or not end up on the floor. So look, if you call a maul before it ends up on the floor, then obviously we're refereeing a maul. All I would urge is that if it looks like it is going to turn into a tackle and it's got some sort of dynamic nature to it, so it could end up going to ground, I would hold off as long as possible from calling a maul, so that when it does hit the deck, we can ref it as a tackle, which means we can encourage the ball out and we can get some continuity in play.
Yeah.
I think this is where, especially in age grade and rugby and so on, if we can talk that ball out to make sure that we don't have another stoppage, and to ensure that we get continuity and the ball stays in play, then that's something we should absolutely be aiming to do. If there's any chance of that ball coming out whilst it's still safe, and whilst we don't have the situation, as Craig alluded to earlier, players running in from distance to try and secure the ball, we should try and make sure that we can try and get that ball out.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Craig, for the law summary there. Sorry to put that one to you. David, just thinking through the chat, is there anything else coming through from the guys and girls on the chat logs at the moment?
I think all the recent ones have been answered on earlier questions. There's a good little conversation going on about relating to what some of the guys were talking about earlier about speed to the tackle. Mark Petridge giving some advice on try to be the third person at the tackle to help you to referee it successfully. I think everything coming through now is more related to what we've already discussed.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So just going on to the next slide then, David, just handing over to you for a moment.
Yeah, so we've just about come to the end there. So thanks very much. The level of interaction has been amazing. There's been some great questions, some great conversations going on between you. The answers that Tom and Craig and Michael have been able to give, I think, have been superb. And we're just asking now on a poll about what you think are the best tips you've heard so far. It'd be great if you can give us some answers on that. The slide here shows how you'll be able to access, or one way that you'll be able to access this again. So if you want to look at Coach Logic, the guys at Coach Logic have given you an option to sign up for free, and we're going to post the video there, and we're going to continue to post other resources relating to refereeing the tackle there to help keep this conversation going, to get more interaction about this topic. We're also going to be, and that's available for existing and new Coach Logic users. All you have to do is go on there and look for the Clubhouse, capital C, capital L, Clubhouse, and you can sign up for free and get access to all this stuff. What you'll also get beyond this webinar is an email with a link to enable you to watch it again on demand whenever you want. And we'll be running more webinars over the remainder of this rugby lockdown on both refereeing and coaching topics. And I think our next refereeing topic is about using advantage in your refereeing. So we just wanted to summarise 3 top tips for refereeing the tackle. So always get there quickly, remain on the side of the team in possession, talk to the players, use preventative calls to encourage a fair contest, and stick to and practice the process. Those 3 things: tackler, ball carrier, then arriving players. I'd like to say thank you to Tom, to Craig, and to Michael for your time this evening. It's been a brilliant event. Thank you to the hundreds of people who have joined. It's very strange times for us. I hope you all stay safe and well over this period, and we're all looking forward to being able to get back out and playing, coaching, refereeing, and being involved in rugby again as soon as possible. So thanks very much. Please keep an eye out on those social media channels there for information about the next event, and enjoy the Easter weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you, David, and thanks to Craig and Tom, and thanks to everyone who tuned in this evening. So thank you.
Cheers, Patsy. Thank you, everyone.